What's up, everybody? I'm Joey Powell on InsideCarolina.com, and we have another episode for you of the Coast to Coast podcast. Special thanks to Johnny T-Shirt for sponsoring. You're listening to the Coast to Coast podcast here on InsideCarolina.com. With me, as always, I'm just Joey Powell, but the guys you're here to hear, that's H-E-A-R to H-E-R-E. Wait, did I say that right? No, I got it backwards. H-E-R-E-T-O-H-E-A-R. Here to hear. You guys know what I meant. You know this gig. You know I'm going to butcher something on the intro regardless. But Sherrell, McMillan, Sean Moran are here. And we appreciate those guys joining us. Special edition tonight because we've got the National Basketball Director for 247 Sports, Eric Bossi, joining us. And we're going to talk a lot about basketball recruiting. Most of you who are subscribers to this show are used to hearing us talk about not only recruiting for the Tar Heels, but Tar Heel current roster, all that good stuff. Well, we're going to get pretty specific about national recruiting, kind of some perceptions, because if there's anybody that has the widest of wide-angle views of college basketball recruiting, it's Eric. So, Eric, first off, how you feeling, man?
I'm doing great. I appreciate you guys having me on.
No, man, it's our pleasure. I will say that the pleasure is all mine. I'm sure Sherrell and Sean probably are used to chopping it up with you guys because you're all old friends. But as the resident new guy here, I am thankful for you being here. Sherrell, Sean, how you guys feeling?
Doing well. I hope you didn't scare Eric off with your spelling there the first 30, 45 seconds because that was a little rough.
Look, man, it's not my first false start, but the people I think love you guys enough that they're willing to overlook my shortcomings, and they're definitely going to be excited enough to hear from Eric today. Um,
That's all right. I'm too annoyed with my lighting situation right now to be annoyed by anything anyone else has got going on. So if you see me fidgeting, it's because I'm really not happy with the shadow situations I've got going right now, and I didn't have time to brush my hair.
well, you've got a lid on.
Glorious hair it is.
You've got a lid on, and our YouTube viewers are going to be okay with it regardless. Eric is also a voter, or he's a voter for the McDonald's All American game, and is also a Naismith on the Naismith Player of the Year committee. So, you know, if you ever have any issues with who wins the award, just at Eric on Twitter. I'm sure he's probably never heard any complaints of that sort before. So, just hit Eric up, and he'll take care of all of your garbage requests. Eric, as you are well aware, there are some big seismic changes going on in college basketball right now, and specifically relevant to this show, Hubert Davis replacing Roy Williams, Roy announcing his retirement in April. I think the first thing I'd like to throw out to you are just what are your impressions of the first class that Hubert Davis has put together in those commits that have come from 2020? And again, to refresh, those four guys are Seth Trimble, Will Shaver, Jalen Washington, and Tyler Nichols. So, in those four guys, from your view, what are your impressions of this class?
Yeah, so it's something that we've discussed about quite a bit on the board. I think it's a really good first effort out there. Obviously, Carolina fans of every school, they always want the highest ranked guys and the biggest name guys. And it seems like we obsess over the misses or why did we prioritize this guy? Because he went down in the rankings, this other guy went up in the rankings. You got to put a roster together. And part of that is finding the guys that say yes and then letting the rest kind of take care of itself. But I think that they had guys that they targeted, and for the most part, their A-line targets are guys that then landed. They brought in Shaver as he was their first official visitor, right?
Correct.
So clearly there's something that they liked there quite a bit. So they got him locked up. Jalen Washington is someone that, there's some concern with the injury history there, but when he's right, he's really talented, and you can't blame them for prioritizing him. And they beat out some really good schools for them. Seth Trimble was someone that I think people thought they might have trouble with due to the fact that, his brother JP went there, and there's a mixed bag of who does or doesn't get blame anytime a prospect doesn't quite pan out to expectations or things like that. But they did a good job of going in there and winning over that family and winning over that recruit. And then, with Nickel, they had to make a hard decision. Do we lock up this guy who's ready to commit? Or do we wait around and possibly miss out on another target, i.e. someone like Cam Whitmore, who's going to be deciding this week? You got to make hard decisions. And I think they've done a great job of locking in on guys. Maybe something that frustrated Carolina fans in the past was not casting the widest nets under Roy Williams. And I don't think they've gone full Henry Bibby mode here where they're offering everyone in the top 100. But they're definitely casting a wider net, being out and about a little more, dipping their toes into some different waters. So I think all things being equal, it's a heck of a start. You've got a lot of guys who are going to contribute to the program. And I think the real X factor here is just going to be Jalen Washington and his health. If he gets right, then everyone will be like, oh my God, what a great job. Hubert Davis. He took this guy who was underrated now as like a top 50-ish player and turned him into a pro or whatever, because that's the ultimate upside for Jalen if he's right. So I've said it before time and time again on the message boards that I see, but I think this is a very good first effort from Hubert and his staff. And I think it would have been pretty unreasonable to expect much more out of him.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer, and you segued really well into what I like to ask next before I let Sherrell and Sean jump in here. Um, I think we've talked about it kind of ad nauseum here, specifically in the differences between Hubert Davis's style, and you talked about the casting a wide net, not going full Bibby. But I do I would love to hear your kind of opinion on what the perception is, or how you feel like um, folks are receiving Hubert Davis's different style versus the Roy Williams style, which again you nailed it, that some folks got a little antsy with after a while. How are you seeing the differences there as a whole, and do you feel like there are any perception changes amongst the recruiting world?
Yeah, perception change. I'm not sure just yet. I think it's kind of early to measure, but there's so many more options out there for kids, especially the top end kids. You've got G League, you've got OTE, overseas options are still out there. There's no choice but to dig a little deeper and throw a few more offers out there. At least I don't think so. We'll see how if any perception changes. But at the end of the day, Carolina is Carolina. When you've got that name behind you, you're going to be able to get into some doors that not every coach can get into, especially not every first year head coach, regardless of experience, whether that be in the NBA, playing at Carolina, being on ESPN, things like that, which are all nice. But that Carolina that is still what gets people in the door, right? It's the blue blood thing. It helps out all the blue bloods. So we'll see how much of a perception shift there is, but I would say that to the casual observer, or maybe other college coaches that I run across on the trail, AU coaches, whoever, I think they've noticed that Huber's maybe a little bit more out and about, maybe a little more, I don't know if accessible is the right word, but it probably is actually a little bit more accessible than Roy Williams was, especially over these last couple of years. And I think that ultimately we're going to find that Roy, who I have said before, I consider a top 5 coach of all time in college basketball, probably did Carolina favors by stepping down at the time he did, rather than dragging things out. Ideally, there would have been a little bit more heads up, a little bit more warning that this is coming. But he decided it's time, and rather than drag things out, he's like, look, I'm walking away. I'm gonna let you guys take over before any damage happens from me kind of not being fully invested in all this.
I appreciate you saying that, because I think that's something we have kind of supposed here on the show, and I think folks have kind of said, kind of as an aside, but you're the first person, especially somebody that is as plugged into the national basketball scene as you are, that's actually said that out loud about Roy kind of doing UNC a favor. And I think that as things progress and you see the distance from the Roy coaching tenure get farther apart, I think folks might start to agree with you. But you're the first person to say that out loud. I appreciate that. Sherrell, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I was going to say to his point about Tabasi's point about Carolina kind of being Carolina, the player like Tyler Nickel, if that was Virginia Tech against, maybe Georgetown or Maryland, I don't know if he would have waited on UNC. I think he probably would have committed to Virginia Tech already. So that's an example of a kid that they offered in June, the very end of June. They kind of held him off on a visit until September, until they could kind of get their things in order. And then they reassess the situation basically the week that he officially visited. So that's an example, because I think people forget, like, top 100 kids, there's only 100 of them, and there are a lot of colleges. So when you can jump in that late on a top 100 kid, it still talks about kind of the ability you have to recruit and how much of a national name UNC is. So I thought that was a great point. What I wanted to ask you, Eric, and for people listening, like, I don't think you realize, I don't know there's anyone out there who talks to more coaches on a daily basis than Bossi. So like when I say credible and experienced and been around for a long time, all those things, I'm not trying to gas him up, but it's
Strong
true.
contact list is what you're
Yeah, it's
saying.
strong. I mean, I'd pay some money to have his contact list from his phone. But in your experience, is there a consensus yet on how to build a roster from coaches in this new era of NLI and G League, OTE, and all the options? Is it, hey, still go for the top guys for some people? Is it, hey, let's maybe try to work in the middle here? Like, how are coaches approaching it so far? And is there a consensus?
There is no consensus. It changes on a daily basis. It's probably being back out and about with coaches during June and July, and not only phone conversations I've had with them through COVID and the explosion of the transfer portal and all this stuff, and all these new options coming out. It changes every day because guys just don't know. It's funny. It used to be really easy in recruiting against someone, be like, wow, they had 5 people transfer. You really want to go there? You can't do that now because that's going to happen everywhere. That's going to become the new norm, is at least 2, probably. Sometimes as many as 4 or 5. We're in an era where teams aren't going to be replacing 4 or 5 players each year. We're looking to 5 to 9 to maybe even 10 that guys are going to have to go about. And how you do that is still very much up to debate. Myself, I think these guys are supposed to be coaches. They're supposed to pride themselves on culture and development and these things, right? So I don't believe that you can establish a strong culture within a program if you're too reliant on 1 year, especially in the transfer market, 1 year guys, because for the most part, we all get excited about transfers, but there's also a good chance that they were maybe someone else's problem somewhere else. So there's a little bit of that you're working with. So I think what we're going to settle into is eventually kind of a mix. I think what we'll see is a target of high school players for the early signing period. When okay, here's 4 spots we have to fill. Let's try and get some sustainability, some stability. And these are the guys that are going to be our core guys that we build around. Then in the spring, when the defections for either the NBA, transfers, what have you, now we'll hit the transfer portal and kind of see how we can plug in those holes. Maybe there might be a high-level high school guy that fits one of these holes, but I think we'll see spring recruiting lean more towards the transfer portal, because I think most people who fall recruiting know that generally the spring, when it comes to high school recruiting, there's really not a lot left over. That's when we see a lot of reaches. That's when we see the guys that I think who tend to transfer the most are those late signees, when guys are like, hey, we got a scholarship. Let's roll the dice on this mid-major kid and maybe he'll work out. So I think we'll see less of that happening, and we'll see more of, okay, we're going to use the transfer portal to, coaches like to stay old, they like to get old. They're going to use that, and I think it'll eventually blend into a nice mix. I think most coaches would like to have prefer to build with the high school kids, and the guys are going to be there for a while, but we are going to find some, they're going to go full transfer portal with this thing. And it's going to be a couple years before it shakes out. But me personally, I would focus high school fall, transfer portal in the spring with maybe a high school kid or 2 thrown in, and then see how that shakes out over the next couple of years, and seize that the right way for my program. And if not, then I've got to reassess and maybe switch up my plan on how I do things. And while there's not a consensus, I would say that probably the majority of coaches that I deal with and speak with are kind of going down that route.
Gotcha. You were the first person, I think this is probably not quite a year ago, like last November, you were like, hey, this is going to be insane. Because we kept asking, like, hey, what do you think Carolina's going to do in this class? And, they haven't offered many guys, et cetera, et cetera. He said, just wait until April, because it's going to be the most insane thing we've ever seen. Obviously, there's not going to be a confluence of super seniors and all that before, but was it more surprising that I forget how many, Travis was tracking it, but I forget how many people ended up in the portal. Did it surprise you that it was that many?
No, honestly, I thought it'd be more. I think I predicted utter chaos and full-on goat rodeo status in the recruiting world, and I think we got pretty close to there, especially with the whole super senior thing being added on top of it. And kind of could see that was coming. There was a lot of talk about that potentially being a thing. So, that in the back of your mind, and that, hey, they can't get out and watch these guys in person. They're going to hit the transfer market. So we saw that come to fruition. And I think, gosh, don't quote me, but I want to say we got up to 17 to 1,800 transfers. Kids in the high school class of 2021 were hurt pretty bad. There were a lot of guys who missed out on opportunities to either make that jump from mid-major to high major or low major to mid-major, or to just get a Division I scholarship, period. And then also, I think what we're going to really need to look at sometime down the road, and I think this is eventually going to kind of bring things back to a little bit more of a consistent order down the road, is there's a lot of kids sitting in that transfer portal that have no home, that thought, hey, I scored 3.1 points per game at this low major. Everyone's going to want me because I'm a transfer. And, now they've got nowhere to go. I think as we see more of that come down the road, it'll get crazy. I won't be surprised in the next 1 or 2 years, a couple of years, it's going to get a little crazier even than it's already been. But then we'll see a regression. We'll work our way back to the mean, and things will kind of readjust and even themselves out. And barring other changes that could be coming down the road, we'll see an evening, because we don't know yet how his name, image, and likeness is going to play into this. Does the NBA say to heck with it? We're letting kids come out of high school. We're going to scrap the G League, or we're going to totally blow up the G League and take what overtime is trying to do and do that with the G League. Like, there's so many unknowns out here, and we don't even know what the NCAA is going to look like in a couple of years. So in a world of how the NCAA has operated for the last 15 to 20 years, I would anticipate a little bit of a return to the norm after a little bit more chaos. But until we find out what other chaos is in store for us, we'll see. Hopefully it gets back to a little bit to normal. I know the college basketball purists and enthusiasts are hoping for that, but we've opened a Pandora's box here, and man, it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
You're listening to the Coast to Coast podcast on InsideCarolina.com. I'm Joey Powell. Sherrell, McMillan, Sean Moran, always here. But tonight we've got a special guest of Eric Bossi, National Basketball Director for 247 Sports. And I got to say, I've already gotten my giggles out of this show, just because this is the first time anybody said goat rodeo on the Coast to Coast podcast. So as Sherrell and Sean know my penchant for saying random things, I'm in debt to you, sir, for using goat rodeo. Sean, what did you want to jump in here with?
Yeah, I guess I'll go in terms of the recruiting class that UNC signed there. You got to see, over the summer periods, especially at Peach Jam, Seth and Washington a lot. Seth made a pretty big jump, just from the summer when you guys were able to reset the rankings, and then after Peach Jam. I was wondering if you could just kind of talk about what you guys saw. Obviously, he played well towards the end of Peach Jam, but what you guys saw to kind of raise him up to that top 25-ish status, and how you could see him fitting in at Carolina.
Yeah. So the biggest thing for me has been the evolution of Seth from a guy that I wasn't quite sure was a full-time point guard to somebody that I feel pretty comfortable that he can have the ball in his hands the majority of the possessions, be the primary decision maker. So seeing that and seeing him lead and seeing him not get frustrated when others don't complete plays, because sometimes as a point guard, you're limited, especially in the assist and turnover things, to what those around you do, and how you react to that was something that was a little shaky for him in the past. And I saw a lot of growth in those areas and with his leadership. And obviously he's a freaky athlete. He can really sit down and defend guys. He can get in the lane. He can create. I think we're seeing a roster that is being built to accommodate some shooters and to have a few more shooters. So if you're going to have shooters and be looking to spread the floor, you got to have a guy who can push tempo and who can get into the lane and draw defenders so that you can kick to open guys and force long closeouts and, not as contested jump shots. And I think that's what Seth does best. So I think he's a fit for how they want to play. He can certainly push tempo, and I'm sure Carolina's going to still run under Hubert Davis. And it just seems like a good fit for the roster that they appear to be going for. I don't want to say they're trying to go Golden State, but everyone's trying to do that right now. Just get as many shooters on the floor. the old 3 is a 4 these days, the old 4 is a 5. We're seeing some different things, and I think we're seeing that because while Seth isn't a shooter, I think the idea is the rest of these guys that they're bringing in are going to be shooters and stretch floor. Jalen can stretch the floor. Will Shaver wants to play facing the basket quite a bit. Nickel fits that kind of 3-4 stretch guy that everybody wants, the combo forward. So Trimble's kind of the right guy to play with that. And you look at some of the guys that they've already got there, specifically Kerwin Walton, assuming he continues to improve and build on what he did as a freshman. You're looking at an ideal guy, I think, to do that.
So 2 things. I want to start with a kind of high level question overall, and then I want to jump into Tyler Nickel a little bit. So the high level question is, as an evaluator, we get this question quite a bit. And honestly, I feel like it's hard to do, but I want to ask somebody who does it professionally. What is it like to evaluate how a player's defensive skills might translate into college and high school in AAU? Because we know it's so much different and there's so much more offensively that they have to handle. So like, how do you assess that?
It's tough, but it's tough because the level of player they're going to be being asked to defend is going to change. There are some guys who are able to overcome poor fundamentals or poor efforts simply because they're more athletic than the guys. Like those are the things that you don't know. But things like lateral quickness, length, effort, consistently getting after guys and showing some spirit on that. And those things translate to me. So when you see that out of guys consistently on the defensive end, you can feel pretty safe that if that effort level is there and just guys who get a lot of deflections, seem to be magnets for the ball, generally that doesn't happen by accident. And generally those things translate. It's the guys that, man, if Seth Trimble was only getting steals because he seems to always let somebody go by and then poke it away, then I'm a little concerned because that's a really bad habit that he's forming. It's going to be tough to break. But to me, he moves his feet. He gets down in a stance. He sits down. He shows some intensity. You can see that it matters to him. Like you'll see him, he'll mutter to himself. He's getting beat a couple times. It takes it personal. And so as an evaluator, I feel pretty good saying, okay, you know what? I think that guy's ability on the defensive end is going to transfer or translate to the next level. Does it translate right away? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. There's so much more that's getting thrown at these guys, and you never know. Also, what people forget is if you have to carry a big load on the offensive end, mentally, you're thinking so much on that end that can kind of screw you up on the defensive end too. So there's a lot that goes into it. We could probably do multiple podcasts on evaluating specific defenders and also what translates at specific positions defensively, because it's how you evaluate a wing defender for the next level is much different than how you evaluate a point guard defender versus how you evaluate a center defender. So there's a lot that goes into it, but to me, the raw athletic ability and consistent effort are pretty translatable. And those are the things that I kind of key in on.
Gotcha. And that leads me into Tyler Nickel, who is UNC's most latest commitment. He's from a small school in Virginia. For guys, I know we have AU, but for guys who are from those small high schools who put up incredible numbers, is there more? Do they have to do more to prove themselves, I guess, on the AAU circuit? Because people see, oh, he went to a 2A high school and he averages 32 points a game. It must be because the competition is terrible. Like, how do you guys go about that with someone like him?
Yeah, that's a great question. I try not to, me personally, ideally, I'll see guys in as many different situations as possible. Hopefully you can see them with the high school team in person, but I'll always try and review some game films and things like that. You want to see them with their summer team, and then maybe if you can see them in a camp setting too, that's ideal, right? But it's not always a perfect world. Maybe there's a little bit of, oh, well, he's doing that against lesser competition that people always wonder about. But I try not to boggle down my mind with things that aren't happening in front of me. When I'm there in the moment, I try and concern myself with, okay, how is he doing against these guys that he's playing against right now? I don't really care. If I'm watching Team Loaded play D1 Minnesota, I don't really care what happened in a high school game 6 months ago, because what's happening in front of my eyes at this moment is most important. Now, when I'm putting the entire picture together, then I'm going to go through and put all that stuff together, right? But I guess it factors in some, but I try not to factor that in. But we're all human. We're all going to have those thoughts, and the same goes too for the players. I think those guys from smaller schools that don't get as much competition, I think they kind of enter situations knowing like, hey, I probably got to prove myself a little bit more. I'm not going to get the same benefit of the doubt that somebody want. If you want to look for a recent example of this, another player from Virginia who played small school competition, Mac McClung.
Yeah.
He was unreal against those 1A and 2A schools, right? But for Team Loaded, he was like the 10th or 11th man. He hardly got in, and he did stupid athletic stuff when he got in. But it's like, well, if this guy can really play, how come he's their 10th or 11th guy? And the Lakers put that guy on a 2-way after 3 years of college. So we probably needed to do a better job of figuring out what were we missing between what he could do at the high school level and why he was the only 10th or 11th man. Why did Rutgers ditch his commitment? Those are the things that, me as an evaluator, I'm always trying to figure out. Was it something I missed? Was it something that was just unavoidable? There's so many ways you can go down that. But yeah, I guess kids from smaller towns and in smaller settings maybe do have a little bit something extra to prove, but that goes around in all areas. That's not just an evaluator or anything. I think that's something that is built into most of these kids as well.
Joey, I'm going to jump in real quick. Something just came to my mind. All right, I'm going to put you on the spot, Eric. I'm going to give you some time to think. So I'm going to
now put me on the spot, but give me time. Okay.
I'm going to do both. I'm going to meander a little bit. So I want to know who you think is your biggest hit. So someone who maybe everyone else didn't really see them being good or great in college, and you said, you know what, I see it now, and that person went on to be great. And then sadly, I want to know your biggest miss too. Someone who you thought was just going to be a great player in college basketball and maybe just didn't quite turn out right. And you maybe go 10, 15 years back. So we're not talking about anybody recently.
Yeah, no. And it's tough too, because sometimes the rankings all adjust themselves out with time. Right. But, I remember years ago when he was between his freshman and sophomore year of high school, sitting down with some Nike executives who were obsessed with Austin Rivers and telling them how out of their minds crazy I thought they were, that they thought that kid was better than Bradley Beal. I was to the point where I had one person who's no longer in the Nike grassroots system tell me if I mentioned the two words Brad and Beal together in a sentence again, he would ban me from Nike events because he was so tired of hearing about it from me. But, everyone thought Brad Beal was a top 5 player, but that class goes into, it wasn't necessarily my decision, but I was at Rivals at the time. We ranked Anthony Davis behind Austin Rivers, and Austin Rivers ahead of Beal too, which I was upset with enough. But I remember thinking like, wow, we're gonna look pretty bad on this one. But that wasn't my call at that time. Others, I would like to think that you always want to be on top of the guys that are in your region. So it's not like Ron Baker is the biggest stud of all, but I saw that kid play as a senior. I called dang near every team in the Big 12. Definitely called every school in the Missouri Valley and said, you need to take this kid. And it took Wichita State saying he'll walk on for a year for that kid to get a chance to do things. So I thought that was one that I felt pretty good about, that like, hey, I thought this dude could be pretty good. And I couldn't even get people to watch DVDs that I was willing to send them of his game film. So, but then if we had to go misses, like for me personally, it's ranking Scal Labissiere ahead of Ben Simmons. I know that's a number 1, number 2 one, and there's certainly others that I can go back and look through and go, oh, what was I thinking? Ranking LeBron Nash or Quincy Miller this high or whatever. But, the Skal one, that's on me. I fell in love with him playing for basically a glorified rec league team that didn't have anyone else any good on it, and him dribbling the ball up the floor and shooting 3-pointers. And I don't know if it was just being too blind to it or just not having the wherewithal to think, hey, you know what? He's never going to be asked to play like that or allowed to do that ever again in his life. So nothing he is doing and translating. It's all smoke and mirrors. As coaches love to say, it's fool's gold. Coaches love fool's gold, right?
This is a
You weren't
safe
alone
space,
on
Eric.
him.
This is
Yeah, you
okay.
weren't
Yeah.
alone on him either.
But Ben Simmons did things that, throw away that the dude still can't shoot. The guy is different. He's 6'10", multi-positional player, freak defender. Looking back on that one, I wish I had a do-over on that one. And that's one that always sticks with me pretty bad. And then, I could go through year by year and you could be like, oh, well, what about this one? And I'd be like, yeah, that one's pretty
Eric,
bad.
it's okay. We're not going to tell anybody. It's just between the
No,
four
but
of
I
us.
mean, it happens. That's the thing is I think one of the things that maybe bugs me some in the role that I do and others in it is there's a lot of people in my profession who, rather than just saying, you know what, here's why I thought I did on this player, I got it wrong. Want to try and explain away a mistake. We get stuff wrong. We're in, this isn't the easiest thing to do. We're talking about teenagers. We're attaching a rating to them at 17 or 18 years old, and we're being held to that standard of how did we do when we're not allowed to change our opinions on them at 19, 20, 21, 22. If we were allowed to change those rankings each year, we would probably look a heck of a lot smarter, right? But I think that by and large, if you look at how many of the higher ranked players tend to get drafted as well, I think we're doing a pretty good job in the grand scheme of things, but I always want to be better. Every year I look at the projected first round of the NBA draft and I do an article on like, okay, here's my biggest misses in this draft class. Here's what I think I missed on it. Here's what I saw. Is this something that I could have done better? And if so, what's the lesson I've learned for it? Or is it just, what, hey, I never saw John Morant play. How could I have possibly known he was going to be that good? Clearly a lot of smart people who should have known didn't know that he was that good. It just happens sometimes.
Well, you talked about your biggest hits and your biggest misses, and we appreciate that transparency and authenticity. But speaking of biggest hits, I'm always kind of drawn to Johnny T-shirt as a biggest hit. Because, I mean, that's absolutely blue chip, 5-star, top level talent at johnnytshirt.com. Our friends over there on East Franklin Street in Chapel Hill, they've been sponsoring Inside Carolina for a long time. They have been absolutely all over the threads and gear game like Eric is all over the recruiting game and the talent evaluation game. So I want everybody to take a second, check out johnnytshirt.com. If you're in town in Chapel Hill, go by their store on East Franklin Street. If you'd like to, you can order online, pick up outside. They'll even bring it to you curbside. But if you're ordering online, make sure you use that quick shipping they have. And Inside Carolina premium subscribers, which if you're a premium subscriber, you already know Eric. You feel like he's part of the family. You can invite him over to your house for, Sunday minestrone soup or whatever. But if you're a premium Inside Carolina subscriber, you know that you get that extra 10% off the top of your order at Johnny T-Shirt. So Johnny T-Shirt, we love them. Hope you love them. Want you to patronize them, use them, let them outfit you, and have you looking good the next time you set foot on campus or the next time you go to see any of your friends. Don't be that guy that's wearing a sweatshirt from 1987 from Duquesne University. No offense to Duquesne. Take a quick break and let the national guys come in and pay some bills. We'll be right back talking with Eric Bossi on the Coast to Coast podcast here on InsideCarolina.com. All right, we're back. I have held Sean Moran at bay long enough. He has a absolutely just major follow-up that he wants to hit Eric with. So Sean, I'm gonna step away and allow you to dive back in, man.
Definitely not a major follow-up, although I could go off of, the Beal, Austin Rivers, and Scal and all those guys, just because that was probably my heyday in terms of seeing guys, numerous times. But in terms of the 21 class, that was a class that got cut a little bit short. That was a big class for Carolina that they had coming in, but none of those guys got to really test themselves in the all-star games or really, some of them did the state tournaments. But, when you're in those all-star games, it's the best of the best going against each other. And when you're watching those, how do you kind of take that into account after seeing somebody's work for maybe 2-3 years? And now all of a sudden they're playing against, the best of the best. So I guess the question is, how do you kind of take that into account? And then two, how do you think that affected some of the rankings for the 21 guys?
This is a great question because I would say I would have answered this much differently, maybe even as recently as 5 years ago, definitely 10 years ago. I remember the early days in my career. I've been doing this now for going on 21 years. When you would go to the McDonald's All-American game or the Hoop Summit or something like that, the game didn't really matter. It always turns into what is. It's an all-star game. I laugh every year. People complain about it, like, how do you not know what you're getting into at this point? But it used to be those practices, especially once those guys got to scrimmage against each other, East versus West or what have you, were legitimately like intense. There were NBA guys there prior to the elimination of being able to jump straight out of high school. And that was really their first. Oh, I guess NBA guys are there now too. So it was a chance to really get a first impression with NBA guys. And also, guys didn't play with each other as much in the summer. There weren't as many camps. There weren't as many exposure things. So the intensity level was a lot higher. And I felt like guys showed up with a lot more to prove at those events. So I think there was a lot more value to be had in them. But I think today there's more all-star games. You've got Jordan Brand, you've got Iverson is coming into this. You've got other things that are happening. So the experience is, it is watered down a little bit. The experience is watered down. And I also think that many more times guys are showing up to these games entitled, feeling that they've belonged there the entire time. And there's just not that same intensity. It's more of a week-long party. And I'm not saying there aren't moments and stuff, but as I've gotten older and as things have changed, things change with time. This isn't a old man yells at the cloud or the sky situation. This is just you got to be realistic. My priorities at 18 years old were different than today's 18-year-old. My father's priorities at 18 years old were much different than mine. And, times change, things evolve. And I think we have to be willing to sit back and take this all in. And while we'd like to have these ideals that, hey, here's what I think is important, so these kids think it's important too, it's not that way. So I think the experience has been really watered down. I think the competitive edge and the practices has been lost. So I don't think they're near as good nor nearly as important as an evaluation tool as they used to be. Now, maybe in the case of we're really trying to decide a contested number one position, maybe Chet Holmgren and Paulo Banchero would have just flat gotten after each other at the McDonald's All-American game workouts or something like that. We don't know. But I think that I would have been more reliant on their long-term bodies of work when putting these things together. And maybe I'm wrong in this approach. Maybe what everyone else who's there sees is different than what I'm seeing, but that's just my take and how I see it. So they're still important because you want as many things as possible, but I don't want to let a couple days of practice outweigh a complete body of work. Now, if there's a legitimate, like hotly contested deal, well, that might make things a little bit differently. Or if someone just comes and just blows you away, like, maybe, okay, I'm on the committee. Jackson Grant, who's a freshman at Washington now, made the team. And I thought, okay, that's a little bit of a stretch to me, but he got voted in. So congratulations. Maybe he would have gotten there. And he's a guy that I would have watched pretty closely to be like, okay, what am I missing that other people thought he should be in this game, that I think he's a little bit of a borderline pick, right? Maybe a kid like him, I would have focused on him a lot more and used it a lot more as an evaluation tool. And maybe his ranking might have gone up quite a bit with us. But overall, like I said, I think they've lost a little bit of their luster. I'd love to see it come back some. I don't know how you do that. And I don't think it's necessarily a thing of these kids don't get it. It's just the setup of the entire system. It's considered for most of these guys like a birthright to make the McDonald's team, not an honor. And I don't know how we get back to a point of getting guys to understand how truly big of an honor it is to make the game versus like, okay, I've been destined for this since the 8th grade. And once we can answer that question, maybe we can get back to it. But that's kind of where I am with it.
as the show's resident old codger, I absolutely take no umbrage with you being the old man that shouts at a cloud if that's the route you wanted to take. But I certainly will accept your disclaimer, and we'll keep that in mind. All right, I want to give our listeners and my two venerable co-hosts here. Um, I want to see if you. Well, you know what? Hang on. I've just been hit something in the chat that Sherrell wants to throw out. Sherrell, go ahead. Ask your question, man. I'll save mine for the end.
I'm sorry, we have you. So real quick, just super short. I'm just very curious. You're commissioner of Grassroots, all Grassroots basketball, and you can make one change today. What do you do?
One change in Grassroots. I would eliminate the reliance on shoe leagues that have created separation among guys. The shoe leagues are very important. I don't think they're bad things. I think they're good. But in the summer of 2020, the few things that we were able to see go on, and then in the spring and into July, we saw a lot more, interconference play, so to speak. We saw more Under Armour teams play Nike teams. We saw more Adidas teams play independent teams, and so on and so forth. And I thought that was good. I thought that gave a lot of added exposure to players who did not play for shoe teams. I think it allowed us to just kind of see guys in different situations. And I think it's good for the kids. Like, the EYBL is freaking awesome. The 3SSB is awesome. What Under Armour is doing in the association is awesome. What it's doing for these guys in terms of exposure and stuff. But having a lot of frank conversations with those kids over the years, I do think that by and large, by the time they're done with it, especially if you're through one system for 3 years, by the time you're done with it, you've seen it, done it. A little variety would be nice. Seeing some of those other guys and seeing like, okay, Chris Livingston's over there playing for We All Can Go on the Adidas circuit. I don't think that guy's a top 5 player. I think I'm a top 5 player. But guess what? I play for Bill Williams. We're an EYBL team. I can't play him. I think we've lost a little bit of that. So we've got to have the shoe companies. It's just as it is because of how much money they dump into youth basketball and the opportunities it creates. And the leagues are a good thing because whether people think so or not, Sherrell, Sean, you guys have been to these things. There is a lot of structure involved with these things. There is better than average coaching than people traditionally associate with, AAU grassroots ball. So it's a good thing in general, but I would like to see, we don't have to play 25 games against Nike teams. I think you could serve the same thing for what you're trying to do by having 15 games against Nike teams. And then maybe 2 other events where you play some Adidas teams, you play some UA teams, you play some unaffiliated teams. And when I started, we didn't have shoe leagues, period. You went out to AU Nationals in Orlando, and it was probably a little bit more East to Midwest focused, but you had teams from all the different companies there. And you could really see when you went out to Vegas, it was a total free for all of what was going on. So I'd like to get back to a little bit more of that. And I think that would be outstanding for everyone involved. Like my biggest thing that I've ever and always want to do, but it will never happen. Never in a million years will they let this happen. Take the final 4 teams from the Peach Jam, take the final 4 teams from the UA circuit, take the final 4 teams from the Adidas finals, and then the best 4 independent teams you can find in August, send them to Las Vegas or Dallas or somewhere, have 4 14 pools with 1 from each group in there and play it out. Seed them by how they do in the pools and then play it out and see who's left standing. I think that would be amazing. It would be an incredible event, but I don't see any way that the shoe companies let that happen.
So one quick question on staying on AAU, and once again, for a while I was always just reading the reports and reading the recaps of these games before I actually got to start going to a lot more. Is there one game? Obviously this spans a good career, but is there one AAU game that just kind of rises to the top of your mind? And
yeah, Team Texas against the DC Blue Devils in April of 2005 in Hampton. Kevin Durant as a rising, I guess, senior, and Jarrell Arthur for Team Texas as a rising junior. Durant must have like 40 or 45. Jarrell Arthur went off, kind of established himself on the scene. That's one that stands out to me. Another one is the summer of 2003 in Las Vegas, the Atlanta Celtics against Seattle Rotary. The Celtics had Dwight Howard, Josh Smith, Randolph Morris, Javaris Crittenton. Rotary had Marvin Williams, Terrence Williams, the other Williams, Marcus Williams went to Arizona, Rodney Stuckey. I mean, just pros all over the place. It was a semifinal game. I also remember because my bachelor party was the night before. And going back in and getting coaches to give me their passes to bring back out to my friends who were with me on my bachelor party, to bring them in to see this and get an idea of what I did. So that stands out for not only being a great game with high level talent, but also just because of other sentimental stuff. But, you know, those are a couple of old ones that really stick out to me.
Great.
All right. So last thing, and I actually like that we stopped and kind of went down this wistful journey with you before we let you go, Eric. And we're talking to Eric Bossi, National B-Ball Director for 247 Sports. Last question, Eric, and I think that we're officially outside of the statute of limitations on this since he just recently retired. But I know it would be entertaining for our listeners and viewers. Tell us your best Roy Williams recruiting story. If there's one that you feel like you can tell that, you know, won't really break any confidence or won't really ruin any relationships you have, a good Roy Williams story from the trail that you want to share with us as your parting shot.
Boy, that's a good question. Also, now I'm thinking about this, Jarrell Arthur and Kevin Durant were in the same class, weren't they?
Yeah. Ty Lawson was in that game too, I think.
Yeah, Ty Lawson was in that game too. Yeah. So I want to say they were both rising juniors, so it would have been, I guess, 2004, not 2005. But you get where I am, is both these guys kind of going nuts and it being like, holy crap, Kevin Durant's Kevin Durant and whatever. So backtracking. Best Roy Williams story. Man, there's a few, because I don't know if you guys know this about Roy Williams. He doesn't exactly talk recruits a lot with guys like me, but I actually have developed a pretty good relationship with Coach Williams over the years, and would always sit down and chat with him, especially the last couple of years at events and stuff like that, just because he got used to seeing me and you know I wasn't going to try and get up all in his business. But I don't know if there's a recruiting story, but it's a more personal one that
We'll
always find kind of funny. Some of you may or may not know that about 4 or 5 years ago, I lost a pretty considerable amount of weight in a pretty short time. And Coach Williams hadn't seen me in a while. And I'm walking by and he stops me and he's got this very, very concerned look on his face. Like I could tell he's conflicted. He's like, Eric, do you mind sitting down for a second? I'm like, yeah, Coach, what's up? You know, he's like, I don't know how to ask this, but are you sick? I'm like, what do you mean, am I sick? He's like, well, you just look much different than the last time I saw you. I want to make sure that you're not sick. I'm like, no, actually, Coach, the opposite. I'm the healthiest I've been in 15, 20 years. And just the look of relief on his face. And he's like, I've seen you for a couple of days. I didn't know how to ask it. I didn't want to offend you. And I was just dying laughing inside that, like, you know, here I'm walking by and Roy Williams is thinking, God, what disease does this guy have? Not thinking, oh, hey, great job of working out, E-Boss, you know. And then, but then once I told him that it was through, you know, diet and hard work, he was very, you know, gracious to me and things like that. So that one always stands out just on a personal level. Another one was sitting there years ago. LeBron James had a broken wrist during the summer between his junior and senior year. So he didn't get to do the AAU circuit, but they kind of paraded him around everywhere. And it was at the Nike All-American camp. After the day was done, LeBron went out and just started shooting jump shots. And I sat there, it was basically just me and Roy Williams. And we sat there for a good 30, 35 minutes and just watched LeBron shoot jump shots with a cast on. And I was like, Coach, you know, don't you have like a dinner or something to go to? And he's like, this is the closest I'm ever going to get to this guy playing for me. So I'm going to soak it up for as long as I can. And I just thought that it was kind of cool that he could see what that guy was destined for and just wanted to kind of take a second and kind of breathe it in, because he's, at least in my mind, that's what he saw was happening. And he was just kind of mesmerized by seeing what this guy was going to be. So that one, especially because I was so young and new to the business, to be sitting with a legend like that and have him engaging in small talk was always something that I'll really remember about him.
That's awesome. I appreciate you sharing those. I would challenge our listeners to try to imagine your interaction with Coach Williams after after your weight loss, and try to imagine his response with a couple of dag gums and the consternation that
Oh,
he would usually show to folks. I think that absolutely makes your story amazing. I
yeah.
love that.
And it was great too, because you could tell he felt so bad because he was so worried he was
He
going
was
to
in his own
offend
head
me,
about it.
or worst case scenario, maybe I was actually sick.
Right.
And now what do you do with that? But luckily I was perfectly healthy. And there happened to be another coaching friend of mine who was actually a former player of Coach Williams nearby, who just started roasting him on things, so it was like, I doubt he remembers it, but I remember it. And it was just one of those things like, this is kind of funny. And I just appreciated that, for someone who supposedly doesn't care about guys in my line of work,
Yeah.
that he cared enough to pull me aside and make sure that I was okay, and then go on from there, because that was the most important thing.
Well, and the LeBron story too. I think folks will know. IC subscribers and UNC fans alike will all recognize that he was fond of saying to appreciate the journey. And it was
Mm-hmm.
obvious from his story about sitting in the gym and just watching LeBron that he was, like you said, taking a moment to appreciate the journey. Um, Eric, I really appreciate the honesty and you opened up with us tonight. Sherrell, Sean, you guys got anything for Eric before we let him get back to his life?
I'll just say I was at that game in Hampton too, and it really was incredible. So I was hoping that was going to be on your list.
Yeah,
Love it.
it's way up there. And I'm sure there's others more recent that I'm forgetting, but I'll probably need another 10 years before I go back to like, oh yeah, that one was really cool. For some reason, those years, 2004 to 2007, are just kind of like burned in my memory, because that's when I was like really out there chasing it, thinking that, hey, maybe this could be a full-time career versus a side gig for me. And it just real formative years for me. So that stuff always sticks with me.
That's strong. Sean, you got anything for Eboss before we let him go?
No, thanks for coming on. Always fun to hear the stories, and hopefully we'll be seeing you on the road. This coming season.
Yep, Eric, we certainly appreciate it, man. That's Eric Bossi, absolutely gem of a storyteller. I don't know if he knew that coming into this, but I'm very appreciative of his storytelling ability. But he's the national basketball, excuse me, national basketball director for 247 Sports. Got through this whole thing without having a frog in my throat. So, Eric, we appreciate your time. Appreciate you being here. Want to thank Sherrell McMillan and Sean Moran, as always, for being the rock stars that they are. I am just Joey Powell. Remember, if you haven't, subscribe, rate, review us. All that stuff really helps the show. We appreciate you guys being a part of this little community we got here. Appreciate you subscribing and being a part of Inside Carolina. And we appreciate you listening. We will catch you next time on the Coast to Coast podcast here on InsideCarolina.com. Late.